The story takes place the night before Halloween. I don't remember my exact age, but I'm sure I was in middle school, either 6th or 7th grade, so I couldn't have been older than 12. To provide some details to the story, I didn't weigh more than 100 pounds until I reached high school. I was always very skinny, flat from just about every angle. Wasn't particularly tall or short for a girl. I was overall pretty low energy, but the holiday that always had my excitement through the roof was Halloween. I was, and at 22 years old, still am, huge on costumes. That night, my mother drove my sister and I to this mini strip mall where a discount clothing store had just opened, maybe 3 months prior. The reason why I call it a mini strip mall is because the only other two open businesses on the strip were Sally's Beauty Store and Marshall's. It was a last minute trip and it was easily around 8:30 or 9 p.m. So Sally's was closed and both Marshall's and the clothing store we were going into were going to close within the hour. That being said, the clothing store was surprisingly massive once you got inside, and for Halloween they decorated the place from wall to wall with really cool decorations and costumes. It was very easy to get separated from your group in a place this big. It had many tall rows and was nearly impossible to see over. Shortly after my family and I had entered the store, one of the workers in the dressing room section puts on a skeleton mask and jumps out from behind the rack of clothes, frankly scaring the shit out of me, and me only. My mom and sister, of course, have a great laugh and separate from me, go shopping on their own. I know it was in good humor, so I go looking for a costume of my own. I had a serious addiction to my MP3 player during this time and had my headphones in while browsing, but kept getting the chills on the back of my neck because I felt like I was being watched or followed. At one point, I took one of my headphones out and turned the volume down on my music, and noticed whenever I got a feeling that a person was watching me coming closer, I'd hear the creepiest whistling noise. There were a few other families in the store shopping, so I told myself I was just being paranoid, but went to go find my family anyway. They tell me that they're gonna go a few doors down to Marshall's to shop before they close, and that I was welcome to keep costume searching at the store and to come find them when I was done. My mom gave me $20 and she and my sister left while I continued shopping. The feeling that I was still being watched or followed never left, and I eventually started looking under the clothing racks as I walked and saw a dirty pair of black sneakers on the other side of me more than once. However, I never saw the person's face. At this point, I knew I wasn't finding a costume there and was starting to leave the store to walk to Marshall's to find my family. I distinctly remember hearing the footsteps not far behind me as I was leaving, even weaving through different aisles like I was. My heart starts beating fast at this point because I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. I ran track in middle school, so I was able to pick up my pace smoothly without losing my breath. The footsteps behind me did not falter. It wasn't until I was out the store that I finally turned around and looked to see who was following me, and I remember my heart freezing when I saw him. It was a white male, probably no more than 35, dressed in all black with his hoodie up, just staring straight at me. He didn't have any bags, so he clearly wasn't shopping there, and while I'm staring at him, making eye contact, he doesn't stop following me. In fact, it looked like he was even smirking. Looking back on this, I want to hit myself for not screaming for help then and there, but sheer terror just locked my vocal cords. I immediately turned back around and broke out into a sprint. The Marshall's was several doors down and a good running distance from the original clothing store. But I'm not slowing down at all because I can hear the guy running behind me and how hard he's breathing to keep up with me. This guy was determined. I remember making whimpers when I realized he was gaining on me and was a lot faster than I was expecting. I was terrified that he would snatch me in this dark, mostly empty strip mall, and that I would never be able to get to my family in time, and that no one would question it, probably write it off as a Halloween prank they'd seen. The last minute burst of strength got me through the marshal's automatic doors, but to my literal horror, the guy runs after me in the store. We're both still going full speed. My brain hasn't stopped to think of anything besides run at this point. To actually scream and notify the other person in the store that they were not witnessing a prank and that I was in serious danger. Luckily, I was as teeny as I was and quick on my feet because I last minute jumped between two revolving stands with phone cases and headphones and knew he wouldn't be able to jump through because of his size. He literally shoves one arm through the gap and lunges at me, trying to grab the back of my shirt. But luckily, he makes a lot of noise doing so, and more people in the store look over. I haven't stopped running at this point, and I have no plans to, and by the time I find my mom, I'm babbling and sweating and crying. The last thing I see was this man making a quick retreat from the store. To this day, my mom and sister still think I'm over-exaggerating this story. They both still firmly think that it was a prank being played by a man working at the store in a skeleton mask. And I hate that it even happened because it really discredited my story. The man working at the store with the skeleton mask was a teenage boy with a bright red uniform on. The man that stalked me and almost successfully kidnapped me was a grown man who had the most terrifying atmosphere I've ever been around. There are many things I wish I'd done differently, but to this day I thank my lucky stars that I was small enough and quick enough to evade this man. I didn't have myself on the date either. I had gotten into some sort of trouble, so if I had been taken, there would have been virtually no way to find me. Just writing this gives me chills. But because of what happened, I'm extremely protective around all my young girl cousins when we're out in public and someone stares at them just a little too long. This story is tame compared to most on here, but at the time it terrified me. For context, I'm 21 now. When I was 12, my family and I had just moved from the Midwest to a town in South Georgia. I was just a 4'6", 85-pound, teeny homeschooled girl that has always grown up in suburbia and now was thrusted into a small town with rampant crime and very heavy gang activity. My dad was deployed to Iraq at this time, so on Halloween night there was no adults to take me and my brothers trick-or-treating because my mom was staying at the house to hand out candy. My older brother decided to stay home because he was 14 and too old to trick-or-treat. Well, growing up in a most organic, sugar-free household, I sure as hell wasn't going to let that stop me from getting my annual sugar binge, and I set out with my 8-year-old brother to trick-or-treat in our neighborhood. It was a very small neighborhood, well lit by streetlights and full of people walking around, so my mom was fine with us going and just told us to be back soon. Well, we started to make our rounds. I was dressed as a chef and my brother was wearing a fluffy lion costume, like the one from the Wizard of Oz. We went down our street and the one next to it and turned to walk down a way that would take us in a circle back to our house. Something felt off all of a sudden. The streetlights were all out on this street, and I started feeling really uneasy. It was so still and quiet, and none of the houses had their porch lights on, and there were no people trick-or-treating, which was strange because it was only about 8:30 p.m. I keep walking tentatively, my brother just bouncing along, happy besides me with his bag of candy. Suddenly, in the dark, I am able to make out a tall figure, about 15 feet down the street, sitting in one of those metal cubes that holds the electric shit that all neighborhoods seem to have. He was sitting extremely still, not looking at us, but staring straight ahead of him, like he was trying not to move. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up and clenched tight around his face. Well, my big sister instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my brother's hand, slowed down my steps, and tried softly to say, "John, slowly turn around and start walking the other way, but don't say anything." Being the loud kid he has been, he said, "What?" in a piercing loud baby voice. I said, "Turn around," through clenched teeth, then pulled him by his hand and started to walk back in the direction we came from as casually as I could. All of a sudden, the figure jumps up and starts sprinting after us, yelling angrily. I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but it was something to the effects of, "You little shits, get back here." We ran for our lives, and I still don't know how we ran so fast. My heart was racing and my little brother was lagging behind. I could still see and hear the man running after us. We booked it around the corner to the first house we saw and burst into the garage where there was a nice old man handing out candy. We clearly startled him. He looked like a nice old grandpa, and I started blurting out what just happened loudly and manically, and he calmed me and my little brother down and offered to walk us back to our house. Before we left, two kids who were sitting in the garage with him walked over to us. They were about our age, and I assumed they were his grandchildren. They handed us a pillowcase full of candy and told us to take them because they already had a lot and we needed it more than them because we weren't going to go trick-or-treating anymore. To this day, it was one of the more striking and generous, unprovoked acts of kindness by children that I have ever experienced. I said thank you, and the friendly grandpa walked us to our home and told our mom what happened. She thanked him profusely and gave him a hug, and we went inside to eat candy safe and sound. I'm really grateful for the old man and his family. This story took place in 2010 in a town I used to live in. It was Halloween, and since I lived in Colorado, it was very cold and snowing early that week. I was 9 at the time, so naturally my mom made me wear bright pink sweats under my butterfly dress. Soon, we began walking the streets alongside my mom and my best friend. To get a better description of our surroundings, we lived in a circle with 2 no-exit streets in the middle. Soon after we started walking, we passed this tall man. He was wearing a white t-shirt and had no hair. I also noticed he had no children with him and was just walking alone. We made eye contact and I was very uncomfortable, but soon forgot about it. About a week later, I'm sitting in my room when my mom came to look out the window saying that there were police all over. I went to look out myself and saw a SWAT car pull up and men with heavy guns walking down the street. My dad went outside to ask someone what was going on. They explained that someone they were looking for was in one of the connecting streets and to stay inside. I was extremely scared, but eventually fell asleep, considering it was a school night. When I was asleep, my parents heard loud bangs and shouting through a megaphone for the rest of the night. Soon after, my mom called me into her room to show me the newspaper article about that night. The first thing I recognized was the mugshot of the bald man in a white t-shirt. So this happened about 10 years ago when I was in high school. My friends and I went to a local corn maze like we did every fall. It was probably a week before Halloween. The place we went to had a large regular corn maze and a smaller one that was a haunted house version. I love scary movies, but I've never been able to handle haunted houses. For that reason, me and my friends only bought tickets for the regular corn maze. I don't remember how long we had been walking around and trying to find the exit, but all of a sudden we turned the corner and there's this man, maybe in his 20s, laying on the ground curled up in the fetal position. We slowly approached and my friend Sarah called out and asked if he was okay. He then jumped up super fast. When he did, we were able to see his face. It was painted all white with black circles around the eyes and a black outline around the mouth like a creepy clown. He then started chasing us. I lost it. I turned around screaming and honestly peed my pants a little. This wasn't the haunted maze. People weren't supposed to jump out at you. We started screaming and running through the maze to get away. He only chased us for a minute before he disappeared. I don't know if he turned around or we just lost him. We found the exit, went to the ticket counter and told them. They said it was definitely not one of their actors, and that they would go and check it out. And that's the end of my story. We just left. I don't think I realized then how creepy the situation was. An adult with his face painted chasing young girls in a corn maze that you can easily get lost in. I feel like anything could have happened, and we're lucky it didn't. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever happens, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had lots of fun. At around 8 p.m., we realized we had to head home, but on the way back we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home and the street didn't have many street lights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. None of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said an older man living in his house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone had called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us that his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around but couldn't see them. I was a paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom had watched a lot of crime shows, and she would always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of these was a story about fake cops. Although I didn't remember the details, I remembered people could pretend to be cops to gain trust. Throughout the whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard a strange request. He said he needed to speak to the potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed that he would hide in the bushes next to the front door. He'd wait for the guy to invite us in, jump out, and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but told us we had limited time. The street was silent, and he could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing that he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he'll be right back and not to go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove us to the house, and in the area around the house, no cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I could say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced that we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it was not alarming. I wonder what his motives were, but it will unfortunately remain unsolved. When I was little, like 8 or 9, I was walking ahead of my mom and aunt with my cousin on Halloween. My cousin and I knocked on the door of a house that looked kind of run down, but not out of the ordinary. We lived in a pretty poor part of the city. An old lady answered. She looked like a stereotypical creepy lady. dirty hair, kind of hunched over and really skinny, with long fingernails and a huge smile. Once again, due to the people in this part of town, like junkies, it doesn't look too off-putting. Without hesitation, she looked around and started trying to get me and my cousin to go inside her house. She kept saying, "The candy bowl's too big to carry, so you have to come in and get it," over and over again. My cousin and I weren't stupid and started getting ready to walk away until we heard the toilet flush and a door opening before an old man, most likely her husband, came out and grabbed the candy bowl from the counter and gave us a couple pieces of candy before telling his wife, "No, they are trick-or-treaters," and then closed the door and immediately turned off the porch light. Due to other similar scenarios that we had heard from classmates and my personal experience, it didn't click with me that I could have been in danger, since I lived in this area for my whole life, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for sketchy people to act up around this neighborhood. After moving from there a few years later, I started realizing that stuff like this wasn't normal. I just left a Halloween party and was dressed as Beetlejuice. An Uber dropped me off by my house, and I started to wander around looking for a food truck. I had seen them out before and didn't really feel nervous walking around as a woman at night by myself, because it's not exactly an abandoned area or known for its crime. I figured I'd find something within a few minutes and be on my way home. Plus, I only had 1 or 2 drinks, nothing to really take my level of alertness down. The problem occurred when I decided to walk between avenues. I wasn't having any luck on Melrose, so I decided to walk north down a residential block to get to another avenue where I'd have more luck. I remember I really wanted to listen to music, so first mistake. I was looking down at my phone, queuing up a song to play out loud without any headphones while I walked. I didn't realize a man was running behind me at full speed until he was almost on top of me. 2 things happened at once. I realized that there was a person literally sprinting at me, and right as I stepped out of the way, he tripped over some fallen palm leaves that weren't visible in the darkness. He stumbled but did not fall, and I said something like, "Are you okay?" But he didn't reply. He just kept running at full speed until he reached the corner and turned left, out of my sight. I immediately felt that what had just happened was very, very sinister. Looking around, there was no one behind him or in front of him. No friends or someone who dared him to pull a prank, and I got a good enough look at his clothes to know that he wasn't in running gear. Even if he had been, why would he be out at 1 a.m., alone, running full speed? He legitimately would have slammed right into me if I hadn't stepped out of the way at the last second. I could only help but to think something terrible would have happened to me if I hadn't hurt his feet or those fronds hadn't have tripped him. What do you guys think? When I was a kid, about 10, I was allowed to go trick-or-treating alone around the neighborhood with 2 friends both my age. I dressed as a witch or something of that nature. Long time ago, so I don't quite remember. Anyway, we got to the house where this man was probably in his mid-40s. He answered the door and says, "The candy's inside, and we can step inside to get it." Being up to date on stranger danger lectures, we politely declined and offered to wait outside. He looked annoyed but didn't press it, and said to wait there and shut the door. Maybe 30 seconds pass and he flings the door open. There's a flash as he takes a picture of us and slams the door in our face. We run down the main street and stood there for a second, wondering what just happened, but then decided to keep trick-or-treating. Luckily nothing happened, but it scared the shit out of us. I went to Walmart today with 2 of my friends. I made a return, then we went back to see the Halloween decor. As we go, we see this man, a good looking man in a nice suit. He looks like he really doesn't belong in Walmart. He looks at me, stops for a second, in the middle of the walk path, then keeps walking and takes out his phone. Now I thought, maybe he knew me, you know? Like, I reminded him of someone, or maybe he found me attractive. I didn't think anything of it till I was in the electronics section, and I was by myself for a moment. My friend had gone to another section. I was looking at earphones, and I happened to look up for a second, and he was standing there. He was acting like he was looking for something, then looking at me. He smiled at me, and our eyes met, and he started walking towards me, but kept looking around. A very weird feeling came over me. I quickly turned and went out to find my friends. I moved quickly and found them in the dog food section. I quickly told them, and they said that I was probably just paranoid, but that we would stay together just in case. I nodded, but the feeling never went away. I was on edge for the rest of the trip. I kept seeing him. I passed him at least 4 more times throughout our trip, and then nothing. My friends felt like he was definitely following us around, and we went to go check out. When we were walking to my friend's car, and he went into a black Escalade, we put all our bags in the car quickly, put the cart away, and hopped in the car. We waited to make sure he was gone. We were so freaked out. We didn't go to our apartment for a couple hours, but went to Red Robin in case he was going to follow us home. We made it back, and we are never going to Walmart again. I haven't been this creeped out in forever. I hope to never see this man again. So I was literally just browsing here, and a certain post made me remember this. Also, not as creepy as other stories, but still creepy to me. So this was like 10 or 11 years ago. I'm not sure. All I remember that it was Halloween, and I was around 5 or 6 years old. Also, since this was a long time ago, some details may not be exactly the same. So I was doing the typical Halloween stuff. Was in a costume and knocking on doors. I get to the sketchy house, and my dumbass thought it was decorated that way. So I went to knock. Some man answers the door, and I ask for candy. All from what I remember, this dude was kind of old. He said he didn't bring the candy, but it was inside, so he told me to come inside with him to go get it. Luckily, my older brother wasn't as much of a dumbass as me. He hurried up to me and gave the excuse that my parents were calling us. And before you ask, my parents were somewhere else in the street, but at the time we were out of their view. So I go with the man, and my brother got mad. He told me that I should never go into a stranger's house again. And me, with an IQ of 0 at this point, didn't understand anything and was so confused. My brother told my parents, and they told me the same thing. So that's the whole story. Not exactly exciting, but if I was smart at the time, I would have been scared shitless. This happened back when I was in high school. At the time, I worked part-time in the grocery store, and it had become a tradition for a bunch of us to all go to some sort of haunt for Halloween. The first year, we went to a haunted forest and then a haunted corn maze. That began with me falling face first into a mud puddle. Seriously, this was at the very beginning, and then included things like getting stuck in a shed type building with a slew of Jason Voorhees characters, being chased by Leatherface, and other such fun things. It was fun. If I find the right subreddit, I might tell some of those stories sometime. Anyway, I want to say that this is our 3rd year doing this. We all headed to a haunted factory in a nearby city. As it was before the advent of cell phones, we relied on printed directions. Because of the size of our group, we traveled in 3 cars, and I was in the last car of the caravan with my co-workers, Noel and Janie. We got lost because the people at the head of the group were terrible at navigation, and we ended up at a rough part of the city. At one point, we drove by a parking garage and heard someone scream. Eventually, our car got separated from the rest of the group at a stoplight, and by the time it turned green, we lost everyone else. We drove around for a while, talking to each other on the phone and trying to find each other. I was in the back seat talking to someone in the first car, Laura, and trying to direct my driver, Noel, while Laura tried to do the same with her husband, who was driving their car. It was not going well. Eventually I was like, Noel, just pull over somewhere and let them come find us. Now there were a lot of places Noel could have pulled over, like a Burger King or office building parking lot, but he chose the parking lot of a shady bar. Why? I have no idea. Perhaps it was because there was a large KeyBank sign nearby that served as a good landmark for the others to find us. So we were waiting in this lot for the others when a line of 7 cars pulled into the bar. This wasn't so surprising since it was a Friday night, but they didn't park normally. No, they surrounded us, the front end of the cars pointing towards us, and because of their closeness, there's no space for us to drive out of there. We were trapped. For a few minutes, they just stared at us from their cars, and then they started to get out and walk towards us in masses. There's about 10 rough-looking guys, and at this point, I was convinced that we were about to get robbed. Get your wallet out, I told Noel and Janie, as I did the same. I didn't have much money anyway, to be honest, which worried me because I wondered what they would do if it wasn't enough. I was terrified but was trying to keep calm, and Noel seemed generally not worried, but I can't believe he wasn't at least somewhat concerned, especially given his car contained both a teenager, me, and his girlfriend, Janie. As for Janie, she was so scared that she was crying. The guy I presumed to be the leader reached the front door first, approaching the passenger side where Janie and I were. He looked inside the car at us for a moment, and then he and his group all went back to their cars and parked normally. Well, I wasn't taking any chances and ordered very sternly, Noel, go to the Burger King, for God's sake. We eventually grouped up with everyone else and made it to the factory, which was far less scarier than what we had just endured. It maybe doesn't sound scary, but I really fucking was. I have a few theories. 1. The guys got out of the car and saw that we probably didn't have much to offer and changed their minds about mugging us. However, this seems unlikely. 2. They thought we were someone else until they reached the car and looked inside. Definitely possible. And 3. They were just fucking with us. Whatever the reason, I was truly scared. And to this day, 13 years later, I regard the city with caution.